All right, it looks like I've been muted the whole time, so I'll repeat all that. Welcome, everyone. You're listening to United Public Radio. Intro music is Mark of the Doomslayer by Carl Casey at Whitebat Audio. And the song before that was by Tool. It is not called Learn to Swim, but that is the message, Learn to Swim. My upcoming guest is someone who I consider a dear friend. He's an extremely impressive individual, and I'm just going to give you a quick rundown of what his background is. So, Dr. David Morehouse is an internationally best-selling author, speaker, and educator. He served as a Special Operations Infantry officer in the United States Army, commanding the Army's only separate airborne rifle company, an airborne ranger company, and an interim airborne infantry battalion. General officers and commanders at brigade and battalion level identified him as a superior leader and consummate trainer of the soldiers serving with him in his units. During his military career, he served in 3 top secret special access programs: the Intelligence Support Activity, ISA, codenamed Royal Cape, aka the Activity; the CIA DIA Remote Viewing Unit, codenamed Sunstreak, aka Stargate; a Strategic Deception Unit, codenamed Torn Image, as a counter-narcotics deception officer, to disrupt the drug cartels in Colombia with a self-sustaining inter- and intra-cartel war. A decorated Cold War veteran, he brings unique perspectives gained from his military, scientific, and business experience to any audience, empowering teams and individuals to discover their untapped potential. David, welcome.
Hey, Sean. It's good to be here.
It's always a pleasure to see you, my friend.
Yeah, it's been a long week.
So, what are you doing right now? I mean, just high level. What are you? How are you keeping yourself busy?
Yeah, I am at I'm at an organization called Upgrade that I'm partnering with, and we'll be bringing remote viewing to the Upgrade audience. And it's, I mean, I think people can go to Upgrade. It's upgrd.com, and you can read more about what's there. It's a good friend of mine, William Lamb, is the guy that is the president, the CEO, and the big lead teacher in all of it. It's got a really interesting clientele. I mean, you got everything from from people who are just kind of starting out in business all the way up to, multi-billionaires, are here. And so I've just been here this week, just sitting in on both in like a level 3 of their training, just to see what they're doing and see what the people are like. And then also standing up and just presenting, the classes that I'm going to be presenting as part of this team approach to this. So it's fun, but it's been intense. I have a feeling at the prices that they pay when they get here, they do not expect to slow down. So it's an interesting gig this week.
So, how are you doing in terms of when you were in the military? You started out or not started out, but you were eventually made your way to a Ranger regiment. And I think following that assignment, you kind of were trying to avoid. Well, there's something that happened when you were in the Army, particularly when you were in the country of Jordan on a training exercise. And that kind of led
Yeah,
you down the path into this area that we're talking about today, which is remote viewing. Can you say a little bit more about that?
sure. I mean, short version of the story is that it was Ranger Company was my second company command. I had 2 years as an airborne rifle company commander, and then I had 2 years as a Ranger company commander. And then kind of my final 6 months, the Ranger Regiment was tasked by the Pentagon to send a Ranger company, to pick one, to go to the Kingdom of Jordan to train Jordanian Rangers. There was a Jordanian Ranger battalion that was there. And so my name came up because I was I was considered by the Ranger Regimental Commander to be like the best trainer in the regiment. That's what he said. So maybe I was, maybe I wasn't. Anyway, my company was selected because my company was extraordinarily well trained, and it was a good company. It was really good, solid. He knew it wasn't going to in any way let them down in what they expected. So we were sent to the Kingdom of Jordan to train Jordanian Rangers. And I always cringe when I say this, but I have to say it. We were there to train Jordanian Rangers to kill Israelis because, in the long run, let's get real. Who else were the Jordanians, pissed off enough to go to war with? It was the Israelis. Certainly wasn't the Syrians, which they didn't like the Syrians and Syrians didn't like them, but they weren't going to go to war against the Syrians, but they would have gone to war to Israel at the drop of a hat if that's what was required. So it was an awkward mission to be there, but we just tried to look at the idea that we were building relationships with them, and our objective was to train them as best we could, to incorporate them along to just doing live fire training like we did as Rangers. And during one of the live fire exercises, I was moving with the assault element because I always move with the assault element as my job to evaluate the lieutenants that were leading the assault elements. And the support by fire position was up at a different location, and it was hammering 10 bunkers. And I got shot in the helmet by a Jordanian machine gunner that was attached to our assault by fire position. We actually had 2 or 3 of them attached, but one of them either deliberately or completely ignorantly, when the signal went out to shift fire to the right because the assault element was coming in from the left, didn't do that. But swung his gun over and put like a 75 to 100 rounds of grazing fire, like 1 meter off the ground, through the assault element. He just swept it back and forth. So, he knew what he was shooting at. So I don't know what they ever did. I didn't see the guy after this incident, but because it was a big issue with the Jordanian battalion commanders. But what happened was it wasn't a ricochet. So it hit me directly in the helmet, and the Kevlar caught it. So that, 2,832 feet per second, roughly, it hit me, and the kinetic energy of that went directly to the helmet. It just took me off my feet backwards. And I was in a crouch position, so I wasn't real stable anyway. And I was knocked out. And during the time I was knocked out, I had some sort of a vision, which I've redefined many times, both, in the book, and then as I've matured and come to know more about what this was over the years, the decades, actually, at this point, I've kind of felt like it was me talking to me. But I didn't share that with anybody directly, particularly my Rangers, and I didn't share it with the battalion commander. I did share it with the battalion chaplain, who happened to be there with us, who kind of got pale in the face and didn't really know what to say about what I'd shared with him, which was, in the book, Psychic Warrior, which I hate that title, but in the book, it says, that it was a ghost, an apparition, a phantom, something. It could have been, it wasn't any of those things. It was me, but it took, my conscious mind was packaging it and based on something in my experience Rolodex that I was familiar with. So it looked kind of like maybe some Star Wars character, wearing that kind of garb and things. And that just happens with your conscious mind doing that kind of thing. When I left that unit, about 6 months later, I changed command, and I'd had a couple of other episodes with that happening. And it was a little disconcerting because I had no claim of clairvoyance and no claim of clairaudience or sentience, and certainly no claim of ESP. Never even entered my mind ever. But now I find myself being recruited into this organization, Royal Cape. And then in Royal Cape, it is, it's the activity. There's a book called Killer Elite, if anybody wants to read it, that tells you everything that the unit did. I don't know how the guy ever got I don't know how the guy ever got somebody to tell him the whole those stories and then to write it, but it's a very accurately well-written book. So Killer Elite, if you want to read that. I was the deputy executive officer there. So I ran a lot of staff actions, and my job was to brief John O. Marsh Jr., Secretary of the Army, and I would do that like 3 or 4 times a week on everything that was going on in the unit. Like anytime the unit was moving outside a 50-mile radius of the Pentagon, it didn't matter if some operator was going on leave. I had to go brief John O. Marsh Jr. and get a signature. And a unit kind of brought that on themselves. That's just another story. So you also required to do a counterintelligence poly, CI poly. And those came about every quarter, it seemed, at the most every 6 months. And when you did a CI poly, you know what they're looking for. It's not full lifestyle like in the CIA. It's just they're trying to determine if you divulge classified information or do you know anybody who has. But they go through a number of questions to determine that. After the CIA poly, you also then go in and visit with the lieutenant colonel psychologist, who's a clinical psychologist, detailed to keep his finger on kind of the psychiatric pulse of this organization. Why?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's a top secret classified special access program, and those come with an inherent set of problems. You know, alcoholism goes up, divorce rates go up. It was a weird unit for those kinds of things. So, and it was my first exposure to that kind of lifestyle in that world. And I just saw things that were really quite disturbing, to be frank. And then I sat down with this psychologist the first time after passing the CI poly, and he goes through a series of questions, like a little checklist. And then his last question is there anything else you'd like to talk about? Which I found creepy. But the second time I get around to this, we go back and do the poly again, months down the road. And then we're back in there again. And he asked me same series of questions. And then he asked me the last question again, like, is there anything else you would like to share? And I don't know what in the world possessed me to do it. I really don't know why I said it. I guess maybe I was looking for some answers as to what that might have been out in the desert and what might have been happening in other similar episodes. Like, best I could call them would be like an out of body experience. That's the best I could come up with it. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't.
Was like was noted for a number of things too. It was Baton al Ghul, and it was
Baton al Ghul, the belly of the beast. It's a haunted valley, according to the Jordanian battalion commander. The Jordanian soldiers at night, when the wind would blow and their tents would rattle, would just shriek because they were certain that it was some banshee that was there waiting for them. It was also a place where the Hajj road, the road to Mecca, snaked in and out of the sand there along one of the valley walls. And then it also was a place where the railroad that was the same railroad that Sir Lawrence blew up with his Bedouin raiders, the same one. It was built at the turn of the century by the Germans under contract to the Turks. So yeah, my Rangers blew that up as well. We got permission from the Jordanians to do it. So we blew a big hole in it just for the fun of blowing it up and showing the Jordanians how to blow it up. And yeah, that was all part of that. But now I'm at Royal Cape, and I share with this lieutenant colonel what had happened there, and then these other minor episodes following that, in the months that followed. And I wasn't really sure what he was going to do, but what he did do is he walked over to a file safe cabinet and opened it up and pulled out 3 blue folders that were stamped top secret grill flame, and handed those to me and said, I'd like you to give me your assessment of this in the morning. As I read through the folders, I didn't know what I was looking at really, but it was a transcript, and it was, of course, dated, time group, etc., classified. And it was also clear that there were 2 different people involved in this in this dialogue, but they were both referred to as numbers. And there were no designators on them. Like I didn't know, it wasn't, there were no alpha designators to kind of like maybe giving you an idea of initials or something. They were just numbered personnel. And I remember that the second one had something really intriguing in reading it. All of them, there were sketches of locks with Arabic numbers or lettering on them. There were sketches of gates and doors and manholes, manhole covers, of stairways and more doors, very elaborate doors, and just things like that. And I didn't actually know what those were about or where it came from, but some of the verbiage in the transcription caught my eye and my attention tremendously. And for example, one that I remember that was quite poignant was the individual saying to the other individual, "Are you outside the door where you're supposed to be?" And the other individual's replies, "Yes, I believe I am." And then the other person says, "Turn your attention to the door and pass through the door, pass through the wall, and describe the contents of the room on the other side." Didn't say walk through it. It didn't say blow a hole through it and then tell me what's on the other side. It was pass through it. And I read that passage over and over again because just kind of made the hair stand up on the back of my neck, because I'm reading a top secret document. I'm reading it in a top secret organization in a skiff, sitting there by myself at night, just reading this and drinking a pot of coffee, and then going on to the next one and the next one. So what I was able to discern from it is that there are two individuals clearly. One individual, they were both appeared to be physically located just by the way the dialogue unfolded. But the one was asking the other person to describe something that they were seeing outside of the physical space where they were located. That I was able to discern in reading the three folders. So the next day, I was there when the good doctor came in and sat with him and said, "I'm fascinated. I'm intrigued." I mean, but they start at that point what's called a limited read on, and you know what that is. In the intel community, particularly in special access programs, they don't bring somebody in whom they think might be interested in an assignment somewhere and then just flat out tell them everything. Because often they will tell people everything and then say, "Do you want to be there?" And the people go, "Hell no, absolutely not." And then you have someone you have exposed to all that intel, all that classified information about a unit, and they're telling you, "No, under no circumstances do I want to go do that." So the protocol is to give a limited read on, meaning just bit by bit by bit by bit, and then assess more and assess more and assess, which he did over the next 6 to 8 months. And I guess probably around the 8-month mark, which put me somewhere like 14 months in the organization, 14 to 16 months. He then, takes me over to Fort Meade, Maryland, and he brings me into, his limited read on was continuing to give me these kinds of transcripts to look at, right? But now he takes me to Fort Meade, and at that place, they're right across the street from the hospital and a communications center. There are two old wooden buildings that are sitting there, single-story wooden buildings, World War II buildings, probably the last two remaining on Fort Meade, Maryland, because, and I found out later that they had actually been designated for destruction, but they just weren't destroyed yet because somebody was, there.
And I was thought, too.
Oh, definitely. The roof was just all buckled, and these green, glass asphalt tiles, it was all buckled, and, paint was peeling off the place. Even the numbers of the buildings, you really couldn't make out anymore. And they had big, huge security screens over all the windows, and they had a giant, metal frame door with a push button lock on it. And I always thought, chuckled to myself the first time I saw it that, somebody could have kicked the hole through the wall and walked in. It wasn't maybe they couldn't have gone through the security screen, but those walls were not going to hold them out. And when I came in, when they opened up the door and I walked in with the doctor, the first thing I noticed was looking across the lobby and this giant mural painted on the wall across the lobby, which was only like 20 feet away. Building's like 20 feet wide and maybe 80 feet long. It was a baker's school in World War II, I found out, because it had red tiles, as it was a kitchen all over the place in different places. And this mural was painted a giant galaxy with red gaseous clouds and stars and everything in the galaxy like its own Milky Way, but not ours. I thought that is such a strange thing to walk into a building to see. Because as you know, Sean, you go into a military building and that building always reflects the nature of the unit. So if it's an armor, command, it's tanks. If it's artillery, there'll be artillery firing all over the walls. Infantry, it's guys, nipple deep in a swamp doing stuff like that. So you just looked at that and I went, Jesus, that's not something you see, in a unit every day. And then the doctor peels off and goes over to see Fern Gavin, who's the program manager there. And they go off in there into Fern's office. And I'm then taken around by Ed Dames, who introduces me to Robin and to Angela and to Mel Riley. And Mel Riley, they're all in like the smokers section. You could still smoke in buildings in those days. So they're in a place where the smoke is quite literally at the ceiling and coming down to about the 5-foot mark, right? And they are all, Robin and Angela have black like tablecloths over their gray army, metal desks. And they're both laughing and talking back and forth, but they have tarot cards in front of them, which I knew what they were, but I don't know what they do or I use them. And I just thought to myself, geez, you have to be kidding me, right? Yeah, you have to be kidding me. Like, yeah, exactly. What did I get myself into? And then when I'm introduced to Mel Riley, who's passed now, Mel is sitting there and he has a deer hide in front of him, fur down. And he has a box of different colored beads and he has a needle that looks like it's about the thickness, size of a human hair. And he's reaching down and pulling one bead up and pulling it down on this. He is sewing it onto this deer hide and making this very elaborate, intricate, beautiful, Native American, indigenous, beautiful piece of artwork on this deer skin. And I'm just thinking to myself, and behind there are tomahawks and dream drums and, lances and everything else. So again, I don't even know what to think, except this is very unusual for an organization. I go out, I meet Lynn Buchanan. He's standing in his stocking feet. He's got one of those chairs you kneel on to type on. Looks just like a kind grandfather, And Gabrielle Pettengale, and who's a very nice woman, became my trainer ultimately. Paul Smith was there, but he was busy doing something else. We met, spoke briefly. And that was about who was there, at that time. Ed was smart. He was kind. He was endearing, at that point. And I got a different vibe from them, but they were all nice. I didn't see any friction between any of them or potentially between me and them. I was then brought in to meet Fern Gavin, and I sat down with Fern Gavin. The doctor came out, went and talked to all the other people, and I guess to fill them in. And I sat down with Fern Gavin, and he looks at me and he says, "I'm always impressed that there are young officers willing to give everything up to come and be part of this unit." To which, to me, that took me back. It took me aback. I was like, I don't know what you mean by that, because I haven't agreed to come anywhere. I don't even know what it is you do here. I've just been given a limited read on. I mean, I've been looking at a lot of stuff, and I didn't even know if it was attached to you or if it wasn't attached to you. And Fern Gavin said, what we do here is we train select individuals to enter an altered state of consciousness, to transcend space and time, to view persons, places, and things remote in space and time, and to gather and report intelligence information on the same. And we would like to ask you to be one of us. Wow. I didn't know what to think. I said, I'm really going to have to go back. I need to talk to my commander, Colonel Lackey. I need to talk to my family. I said, I'm intrigued. I'm not saying no, but please let me have some time to process this and think about it. So on we go back, and I'm kind of having words with the lieutenant colonel, because it's kind of like, wow, you didn't tell me if that's what we're going to do, or that you were going to bring me in there. He goes, well, I just needed them to see you and see if they were interested. And I needed to talk to Fern and see if Fern was interested, and he is. So now they're interested, and they are the source of those documents you are reading. So if you continue to be intrigued by that, then I thought you might be intrigued about going to this unit and serving there for a period of time. When I got back, and Colonel, yeah, go ahead.
Now, based on that first impression, just going back to that moment, what are you thinking about? Like, are you optimistic that this is leading somewhere, or are you kind of like, I got hoodwinked into some, something crazy here?
I didn't think crazy. I thought, look, I already knew that I was on a journey into a world that I was not accustomed to seeing. I mean, just going into Royal Cape and seeing what Royal Cape did, which was, support clandestine covert military operations in tier 1 and tier 2 countries, and do so with every imaginable bizarre thing. I mean, it's the first time I went to a unit that had its own yacht, a unit that had a Rolls Royce, a unit that had like a $260,000 solid gold watch in the safe that I actually put on my wrist one day. That was a prop for somebody doing something.
Yeah, it's like the military's version of the human intelligence part of CIA, sort of, some of it, right?
Yeah, it actually came into existence precisely because the CIA, I mean, Claire George, the CIA, and others said quite simply, our job is economic, industrial, and political espionage. Our job is not to have to support the military every time you go somewhere and do something. So the military took that to simply mean, okay, so screw you, we'll come up with our own program. And they did. Right. That got a lot of people into a lot of trouble, because you'll remember, like the yellow fruit trials and stuff. The military is not good at this, despite the fact that they thought they might be. I mean, Royal Cape was good at what it did, but when they started to actually first throw this all together, they were handing suitcases of money to guys and telling them, go backstop yourself in Germany, which means, you now have a suitcase with $150,000 in it. You're told, don't keep receipts, because that's a paper trail. Go to Germany, get a job as a bartender somewhere, get a girlfriend, get an address, get a driver's license, get identification, do whatever you got to do, but make yourself somebody who works and lives in Germany, right? And
I hope they didn't give
that went along for a while.
$50,000 briefcase to like a young specialist. You can only imagine the things.
It's precisely the same thing. It got Dick Marcinko in trouble. They were throwing money at these guys and giving them, really broad instruction about what to do and what not to do. And that was just the wrong thing, because, leadership was doing this about, this is how we form our own, kind of spy agency to do what we need them to do for us. And the unfortunate thing is that somewhere along the line, probably the GAO, found out about it. I don't really know who was the trigger puller on it, but I know that what happened is the government came back at the Army for that reason. And of course, all the general officers, found a finger to point at somebody else, and it just went on down the road. But who ended up going to prison to being tried, court-martialed, and going to prison were all the people that they handed the money to. And, and yeah, some of them misappropriated it. Dick Marcinko, who was, leader of SEAL Team 6, commander of them, he was taking, a secretary girlfriend on TDY trips and stuff like that, using that kind of money, going and back some of his special ops money. And I mean, I'm not trying to put words into the guy's case, but I mean, that's what happened.
Did he work her into an op or something? Did he try to work her into an op?
No, he just took her with him.
Yeah,
it was his girlfriend, more or less, I guess. And others did very similar things. I mean, you're told here's a, $150,000 or $250,000. Don't keep receipts. Don't tell us what you're spending it on. Use it to support yourself, to establish yourself as a, as a resident in this area, so that if we need you, you can, find safe houses and, corporations that have trucks and other kinds of things. That's what they were looking for. And I told you before, this is the organization that actually co-opted with the Mormon Church to use non-LDS kids to go to the Mormon Training Center, Missionary Training Center in Provo, Utah, and also to the language training mission in Provo, with the church leadership being willing, and they were pushing these guys through all of that, and then pulling them out and sending them into countries in Central and South America, and or any place else that they wanted to send them, so that they could gather intel.
Yeah, using the mission as a cover. I'm using the Mormon mission as a cover.
Yeah,
which would put other Mormon missionaries at risk who had no connection whatsoever to the DoD.
Absolutely. I mean, look, when I was at BYU, one of my roommates, my roommate was on a mission and said, he was in Central America somewhere. And he said, everybody down there thought we were like CIA all the time because we were walking around suits. And I was like, now I understand why, because here's this unit that is set this thing up. I was really upset. I mean, I was really upset because, as you know, at that time I was a high priest in the Mormon Church, and I had served in a bishopric and the stake presidency. And now, here was this. And I fired off this angry letter to the first presidency of the church in my naivete, saying that, hey, I know what you're doing, and, I demand an answer, which of course they ignored the letter because they understood that they can't respond. If they responded, it would have been, either a confirmation or a denial, right? And they weren't going to do either of those. And I wrote back a second one demanding even more and said, if you aren't going to answer me, excommunicate me. And they didn't excommunicate me because that too would have been, an admission or a denial, right? So they weren't going to do that, and they didn't do it. And so there we were. It was what that was. But now I come back to that unit from that day, the visit to Fort Meade, and the lieutenant colonel psychologist goes in to talk to Colonel Lackey. He's there. This unit, Royal Cape, is commanded by two colonels, full colonels. Colonel Lackey, who is an special forces intelligence officer. He's an 06. He's the commander. The deputy commander is Colonel, again, full colonel, special forces infantry officer, Bob Glass. And I can remember hearing Colonel Lackey screaming like I have never heard him scream before, at the top of his lungs at the psychologist, cursing at him for what he had done, in doing all of this. And then the psychologist, he orders him out of his office. He comes out of his office, and as he passes me, he looks at me with these really frightened eyes. He goes, "He's ready for you now." So I walk in
the battlefield for you. Right.
Oh yeah, thank you very much. I walk in.
To set up an ambush either way.
Yeah, it was. Oh man, I walk in and it's Colonel Lackey's there, and Colonel Glass is there, sitting in a chair next to Colonel Lackey's desk, and it kind of starts off with almost kind of forgiving, pleading, like, you don't know what you're doing. This is just really stupid. I know you didn't know what that was going to be. The goddamn psychologist got you all involved in this thing and wrapped up in it. You can't go do this. You just can't go do it. It's a career ending move if you do this. You go there, it's nothing but a organization of misfits and freaks, and nobody has anything good to say about it. And if you go there, you'll never get the stink off of you. And that's it. That's it. Do you understand me? And Colonel Glass his Glass is sitting there going, in the head going up and down. So I said, sir, I have not made a decision. I want to talk to my wife. I am intrigued by the idea of this. And so I did. I went home and talked to my wife. He was really upset. He was noticeably upset that I refused to give him an answer right then and there. But he also was a professional officer. And he knew that I had a right to go, even though he didn't want me to go because he wanted me to stay there. And the next day, he and I always ran to work every morning, like 7 miles. So next morning, I go over to his house, which was behind mine, and I pick him up and we run to work. And, the conversation all the way there was back and forth about just about everything, his whole philosophy about it, his concerns about it. He was really genuinely concerned about me. And by the time, we got to the unit and, got showered and in uniform, ready to start the day, I still had not made a decision, but it didn't take, but another day or two. And I just came in, stood at attention in front of his desk. And I said, sir, I've spoken to my wife and she's okay with this and she understands my choice. And I'm really hoping that you will be as well. I've got to try this. I have to look at this. I have some issues with it and I have to look at this. And I'll be very honest. I mean, I also was really upset that we were orchestrating this missionary thing out of that unit.
Right.
I mean, I didn't point that out to Colonel Lackey, but it was weighing really heavily on me that we were involved.
You can see how it makes sense, though, from the Department of Defense's perspective.
Oh,
right?
I get it. And, it's not the only church to do stuff like that. Believe me, it's not.
Right.
So he was really upset, but, okay, all right, I understand your decision. So I started out processing that unit, and then I would drive from Fort Belvoir, where I lived, all the way over to Fort Meade every day, which that was maddening. But I went there and I got read in and I got taken to DIA and signed in there and, read all your briefings and read onto the program and advised of what you can talk about, can't talk about, et cetera, what I might be exposed to, et cetera. You signed, there was an agreement that you signed stating that you were participating in an experimental intelligence collection methodology, and that you would not hold the government responsible for anything that happened there, which of course I turned around and went like, well, what could happen? Like, what do you mean? What could happen? And it was like, nothing. It's just a standard, it's a standard document you sign is part of I think it's called a human use agreement. I think that was what it was called.
Incidentally, during your any time at the unit, did anybody have one of those adverse reactions that you're aware of? Okay.
Well, me, but for a different, and I'll explain that. Don't let me forget that. So I started my training program, but first thing that they asked me to do when I got there, Gabrielle took me over and took me to a file safe again. This one was on the far right. You know what those things look like. They're like 28 inches deep and however many inches wide. They're 4 drawers high, and they spin the dial and open it up. They open them up all of them in the morning when they come in. They put the big magnetic sign that says open. And then she popped the top drawer on this thing, pulled up the first file in the front, and she goes, okay, you start here and you read every file, backwards. And then you start in the next drawer down, the next drawer down. And when you get done with the last file in the bottom drawer, come see me. Well, that took me like 2 weeks to get through all of that. It took
How many pages do
literally,
you estimate that was?
oh, good God. I have no idea.
Thousands?
Thousands. And what it was the history of everything since like 1972 or 1970, everything that the U.S. government thought that it knew about, a Soviet program, Chinese program, and these were all the human intelligence briefs that came in the 70s that caused the CIA to actually go into, put a sole source bid in, or give a sole source contract to Stanford Research Institute International to investigate ESP, right? And to determine scientifically if it was real or not. Could it be proven scientifically, or could you disprove it scientifically? Because the concern was, and I have to admit, I have to say to your audience, that this was a human intelligence source. There's somebody who recently, a woman who wrote the book Phenomenon. Yeah. Jacobson is her last name. And she's making the claim that there are these recently
Annie
found
Jacobson or Ann Jacobson?
Annie Jacobson, yeah. Recently found German documents pertaining to this group that was researching things for and in behalf of Himmler, through Himmler to Hitler.
Is that the Thule Society?
No, they were a segment of it, but no, it's the, I can't remember the name of it. It's because it's German and I don't speak German. So, but if you look around, it's big stuff, right? Something like that. Anyway, I can tell you exactly what it was because I've read them. Because this claim was made that was the promulgating series, trove of documents that caused the psychic war to begin between the United States and the Soviet Union. Well, it wasn't any such thing because, if you look at it, the letters are broken down into 4 categories coming out of this thing, and they are mostly between the director of this organization and the direct deputy director or the individual that was in charge of the archives or the curator for this organization. And what they were going after was everything that supported the whole Aryan theology. So they were trying to trace the roots of language and the Aryan origin, all of those things to support that. And they were doing it, across Europe. They were, going into all kinds of different places to do it. There was a Norwegian project that had absolutely, nothing to do with anything of the occult or anything else. Mostly what they were trying to do was get Norwegian scientists to work with them, linguists and others. And of course, they occupied Norway. And so the Norwegian scientists wanted freaking nothing to do with them. And it was all letters back and forth within the leadership of this organization reporting back to Himmler about why they couldn't get all these things done. They couldn't establish, a scientific center in Norway and make this happen. It's also that they had another one that was that the 2 others had everything to do with just the study of the origin of the Aryan people and where they were spread across Europe, again, trying to track the whole lineage of where they went and how they got there and the language changes and other things. So right on into the UK and other things. That's what they were looking at. And then the other one was just simply map points for Aryan origins, like Aryan cities or Aryan village, and that's what they were looking for: language and location, something to shore up this new ideology that they have that they're trying to put forth to the German people. But there was one that dealt with dowsing, and it was the dowsing project. So the one that dealt with the dowsing project Also had pendulum work done in it and was being studied. And also it had astrology was being added into that. But the interesting thing is that there was the minister of propaganda and of something to do with the culture for the people, for the German people, and then there were the state police, and all of those organizations were against anything to do with the occult and were against any of the efforts by this organization to do this. And anytime they found these organizations of dowsers studying, they're doing and working with dowsing rods and all this stuff, or pendulum, they would arrest them and throw them in prison, confiscate all of their writings, their documents, and everything else. And so Himmler, trying to keep his mitts out of all of this, was sending these, the leaders of this organization to go in and try to negotiate this stuff. And so the whole thing in that dowsing project series of letters, the trove that's there, dealt with precisely just that, back and forth, who was giving them a hard time, who was arresting their people, why they couldn't get
this was
back.
in the documents that you had to read through?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Because I wanted to find, because the claim was made that there was a letter there that became the promulgating document in the CIA in the 70s or earlier, starting, kind of attributing it back to maybe MK Ultra and then into this, the formulation of Stanford Research Institute and the study of, clairvoyance, clairsentience, clairaudience, right? ESP, etc. So I read the entire translated file that's still there. There are still some letters that are being translated, but I read everything that had been translated, and I, prepared a synopsis of those things. So it had nothing to do with any of that. It didn't light the fuse on anything. I'm sure that we were probably interested in what the heck they were doing with dowsing, but I can tell you this: the documents said, the letters said that what they were looking at it was for military and civilian applications. Okay, and then it said they were going to be using dowsers and certain kinds of dowsing rods, and they were going to be looking for oil, so petroleum. They were going to be looking for minerals, and gems, other kinds of things. That's what they were going to be looking for. So find riches.
Folks, if you're just joining us, you're listening to United Public Radio, and I'm interviewing Dr. David Morehouse, who is one of the original members of Project Stargate, the remote viewing unit in the Department of Defense. Sorry, David, go ahead, continue.
No, it's okay, man. I know you get on a rant. So that's what they were doing. There was no evidence that it triggered anything. So back to what I was looking at again, I'm going through all the historical files and looking at everything that we knew or thought that we knew. And again, back to this, what actually, lit the fuse under the CIA to start looking at this has never been proven. In other words, they don't know where the human intelligence source came from. So that's never been named. It's just been kind of rumored that there were human intelligence sources, either in the Soviet Union or in China or both, that said that both of those countries during the Cold War were heavily engaged in trying to identify naturally gifted clairvoyants to utilize as intelligence collectors. And they wanted to start as young as they possibly could because they had a belief in it, and they wanted to be able to get that, to train it, to nurture it, to build it, and to make them extraordinarily effective. And so that's what caused the CIA in 70, in the researching of that, to turn around then and spend some time getting their ducks in a row and getting out a request for proposals, which they reviewed, and then selected Stanford Research Institute International in Palo Alto with Targ and Putoff et al. To go ahead and do this research and to find out, scientifically prove that it's there or it's not. Tell us who will be good at this so we can scrape them out of the population and train them and use them to our intended needs, right? Or objectives. And then 3, can you if you can prove it and tell us who we need to get, can you build a training program for them? Well, all three of those were answered at least to a degree, that you can read there. And one was simply that it didn't take them long to come back and go, well, based on our evidence, the ability exists, and it exists undeniably and scientifically proven, and very strongly. And again, as I've told this story, CIA they never trust anyone, especially in something that's controversial. And even though they were a sole source contract, they were going to make sure that that science was good and it would stand up to the test of time and scrutiny. So they brought in two auditors and two auditing companies. And I believe it was SAIC and Pear Labs, who were both part of or tried to get the contract but didn't. But they came in and audited SRI International, audited the science.
Pear Labs is the one at Princeton, right? And then SAIC
Right.
is
Right.
Yeah.
All over. But they came back and they had minor criticisms of some of the procedures, but bless the science is good. Just had some minor corrections, which one would expect that, especially from agencies that didn't get the contract and you did, that they're going to come in and they're not going to give you 100% glowing remarks. I don't think the CIA wanted that either. So, but they didn't come in and say it was worthless and the science was bad and they did it poorly. They didn't say that. So it stood. And so the next question was, who is going to be good at this? And what was said, it was very empowering, which was, well, we believe that based on our evidence, this is an inherent ability in everybody. You're born with this ability. It's just a matter of whether or not you choose to recognize it and or whether or not you're willing to be trained to recognize it and utilize it and embrace it fully. So that's where they got through the second deliverable. And then where they failed was in the third deliverable, because they're physicists, they're researchers. They're not trainers. They have the slightest idea how to build a training program for anything. To my knowledge, they weren't even professors at universities. They were researchers. So they design tests, they execute those tests, they collect data, they analyze the data, and they write their findings. That's what they do. But they are not military trainers, far from it. So the very idea that they were ever going to be able to do that was laughable, frankly. So the Army under INSCOM took Ingo Swann, because Ingo Swann was the guy that...
By the way, Ed Reardon just joined us, and he's a remote viewer. His group, the Future Forecasting Group, for people who are watching the Super Bowl right now. We're competing against the Super Bowl, David.
I see.
In real time.
Good luck with that, y'all.
The San Francisco
sounds like Darwinism at its finest for me. So
anyway, I had to give it a shout out. So sorry to interrupt. Continue, please.
Yeah. So Ingo Swann, then, who created this protocol, was brought in circa 78, 79 to start training people. I never knew it, but apparently he trained some of the people only to stage 3 for some reason, and he trained other people all the way out to stage 6. There was a 7th stage that I was trained on, but I was never going to do it. It was a phonetic stage, and I just wasn't going to do it. It was like barking at the moon kind of thing, and I just thought that was preposterous to be doing that. I understood the theory and the mechanism, but I wasn't going to do it. And I was trained all the way through to stage 6 then. Mel Riley was trained through to stage 6. I know Ingo told me he only trained Ed Dames to stage 3, but Ed Dames always went to stage 6. So he learned stage 6 either from Gabrielle or from somebody else. Paul Smith, stage 3 only.
And Ingo kept changing it too. So like stage 3 at an earlier stage in time may have
he
modified of the current.
Modified it and improved it and did other things to it. It was a constant, work in progress to make it better, especially as it was applied as an intelligence collection methodology, then things were discovered that worked and didn't work. So structure was changed a little bit. Categories of data were modified. And so anyway, that it and still does get that way. I mean, all of us who have done it and taught it for decades understand that there are improvements that could be made in it, and we make those improvements. It's a natural flow of it. Nobody violates the principle, only the technique slightly changes in a couple of areas. So that was brought into the unit, and so there it was. But I saw a lot of other things in the historical files which were bizarre. I mean, like remote viewing detectors in the Soviet Union that were supposed to detect the energy flux of viewers, which to me it doesn't pass my scientific mind test, because
if remote viewing works,
if
remote viewing works through a Faraday cage, there must be a mechanism that's not at least detectable from an electromagnetic field doesn't necessarily, it works without one, essentially, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was written up in English that there was a photograph of it, and it was written up the descriptions of how it was supposed to work. Apparently, it was supposed to be calibrated to have a ceiling, a frequency ceiling and floor. And so everything in the room that was going to be in the room was basically set. They knew what that frequency was going to be of the number of personnel in the room, and they would close in the ceiling and the floor on it. So you had a very narrow band of allowable energy. I understand the concept, but for my physics mind, I cannot at all see how it could be done, or even from electrical engineering, how it could be done. But the theory was that if something came into the room that was lower than the floor frequency or higher than the floor frequency, that this detector would pick it up and then sound alarm, and then the meeting would immediately close. So whether it worked or not, I think is unsubstantiated. But what's really important is that we understand that that was a concern. And so therefore, some intel collector got that, and it was part of the historical file. So as I said, again, it took me 2 weeks to get all the way through the historical file. And then I started my training. And my trainer was solely Gabriel Pettengale. The only other people who occasionally substituted for particular things was either Mel Riley or Ed Dames. And usually because Ed Dames is a really smart guy. And, he speaks, writes, and reads Mandarin Chinese. And, both of his sons are physicists now, Enoch and Aaron, and he's a physicist and an astronomer. So he's a guy that I could call in and ask science questions to, because he could speak the science that I needed to hear about why we theorize we're able to do this, as opposed to just somebody telling me, if you do this or put your pen here, do this, and this is going to happen. Because I was really skeptical, because remember, I was the only special operations combat arms officer ever brought into this unit. And I was the only guy ever brought into the unit that had absolutely no statement of any kind of precognitive ability or ESP or clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience. I mean, those words, those thoughts never entered my mind, ever. I mean, I understood why I was there, and I understood what I was learning and what I was going through, but the very idea that was something that I would ascribe to myself was foolish. I mean, it was just ridiculous. That wouldn't happen. So I fought against the results for weeks. But the beauty of the structure, and the beauty of the training, and of doing the training targets and the feedback, and then you're back at it again and back at it and back at it again, is eventually, it's, you're 12 weeks down the road in this, and the volumes of data as you move through the structure become so overwhelming. And when you get your feedback, the idea that you were able to just pull that out of thin air is too overwhelming. And the idea that you would have made that up out of nothing, and yet so much of the data correlated with what you were expected to see, you get to a place where you can't explain it away anymore. And when that happens, the switch flips,
Because they trained you against actual targets that you could verify in hindsight. So after you got something completely blind, right? You got 8-digit coordinates or 6-digit coordinates, whatever it was. That
Two sets of
initially, I
four
think,
numbers, eights, two sets of
and
four.
uh, and they were initially actual geospatial coordinates, but later on they made them
No,
random.
not in the unit. They were, this became one of the criticisms for SRI. They were using lat long.
Right.
And initially they were using lat long. And what they didn't realize is that you start using lat long,
Right.
over time, people start to, understand the patterns that are being established, and they start to understand that it recognize the lat long that you're giving them,
Yeah,
and they start
that
to
one's
understand the
Moscow.
area
Like
where it
that
is.
one's
Yeah.
right. Right.
So then they just, the human mind can't help itself, that it wants to springboard into that and go, well, I know what the buildings look like there, or in that area, or in that region. So they were told that needed to be removed, and there needed to be another way in which to do it. Now, review the bidding. I mean, if you're not doing lat long, then you're doing grid Mercator, which will be exactly the same thing as latitude and longitude, right? It's just
Right.
kind of grid system that ground forces use to navigate on the surface of the earth. And then, or you could, go to a Cartesian coordinate system, which that would not have worked. It wouldn't have worked at all in the way that they were trying to make it happen. So the two sets of four numbers, the coordinates being randomly assigned numbers representative of the concept of the target in the mind of the individual assigning the coordinates.
And that's all
But
you
I
get.
don't think
You just get those
all
four
you get.
numbers, or two sets of four numbers, and that's it.
That's correct. And I do not
Okay.
believe that SRI ever changed from using lat long. I'm uncertain about that, but I don't think they ever changed it. I think they kind of got into the way they were going to do things, which was monitored, and then they had their favorite subjects and they used them a lot. And monitoring a subject, in my opinion, is corrupting the session, because there's no way that a monitor moves a viewer around without having some bias in what the viewer is supposed to see or how they're supposed to get there, even if the monitor is blind. So in other words, the experiment, the session's double blind. The viewer doesn't know and the monitor doesn't know. The viewer still disrupts the monitor disrupts the viewer's flow, their ability to detect, decode, objectify without interference, without, some sort of external judgment or influence, telling them, no, I don't go to stage 3. I want you to stay in stage 2, or go from stage 2 to stage 3 now, or focus more on that sketch, or etc. It's when I was in the unit, as soon as you were deemed operational, meaning you'd ended all your training and you had successfully completed it all and passed all of your oral exams, so to speak, because you had to articulate the theory of each of those to the trainers. And once you had done that and they made you operational, you never used a monitor again. Never. So to use a monitor was like a crutch to take a monitor in to do that. Now, it wasn't unusual for a monitor to step in when you're learning a new technique, a more advanced form of the phenomena. For example, the person that taught me extended remote viewing was Fern Gavin. And so Fern Gavin would do that by teaching me the protocol and then taking me over and having to do a target with him in the room monitoring me. But he only did that for, a month. And then he said, okay, you're cleared hot to do this, to use this on your own. So from that point forward, you're on your own to do it. But all of those things, even looking back now, the unit lacked so much just cohesion in the manner in which it did things. I've said this many times. There was no manual. There was no program of instruction. And I'm a military trainer, and I was a good one, and still am. And it really just upset me that you come in and go, well, is there a training outline? No. Is there a
David, is
program
it
of
that they didn't
instruction?
have a
No.
manual, or was it just like a bunch of papers or documents, but that weren't really helpful?
They didn't have
That they
anything.
kind of had.
They didn't have one piece of paper with anything written on it as a protocol. And I know that, one of my former colleagues claims that he wrote a manual, but you had heard Lynn Buchanan tell you, with me present right there, that was not a manual. It was a basically an advertising document that they gave to VIPs if they showed up there to say, here's what we do, because a
It's a
general
briefing
walks
document.
in.
It's like a briefing
Yeah,
document.
it was a briefing document. It was like 12 or 13 pages long that maybe got expanded to 23. But rather than stand there in front of a general and go, well, here's what we do, it was a briefing document, but it was by no means a manual. And to say so is just a falsehood. It was not a manual. A manual is something that teaches you how to do something, that truly
Tasks,
gives you the
conditions, and
background.
standards, right? Tasks,
Exactly.
conditions, standards.
Exactly.
Right.
So the only time that was written was by me in the last 3 months that I was in the program, because Dr. Jack Verona and Fern Gavin asked me to write it. So I did. And it was 230 pages. And from what I understand, it never made it anywhere, because clearly some of the folks that have been there for 10 years or 15 years or 16 years were like looking at it and going, no way, this guy was only here for 3 years, is going to leave a document behind that we now have to consider our manual. I mean, that was one place where, despite, what you might think, egos flew in that area. I'll tell you, it was a bizarre place like that.
But
I've
that's
never been
part
in an
of
organization fought like that.
But that's part of kind of, I think, some of your struggle with it, kind of post leaving the unit, because as you said, you were there for 3 years, but it also kind of gave you a sense, kind of a better view into, or I don't know about a better view, but a more complete view in terms of having a window on reality and seeing
It
things
changes
the way
it changes the way you see the world. It changes the way you see your role in the world. It changes your perceptions of people. You can see narcissism, you can see sociopathy, you can see, psychopathy and all of its manifestations, even in yourself, right? You can see it because you become hyper intuitive. I mean, you're 3 years of doing this day in and out, day in and day out, and always my big buzz phrase to folks is, look, everybody believes something, right? We believe that there is something beyond the physical, or we believe there isn't anything beyond the physical. And some people believe there is something beyond the physical and they can reach it, interact with it. But the vast majority of people overwhelmingly believe that there's something beyond the physical, but don't believe that they will ever be able to interact with it, learn from it, or contribute to it. And every poll done, including, Pew Research poll on this very same thing, conclude that. The only thing that's changed is the number of people who disbelieve has increased by a number of points, and the number of people who don't believe they will ever be able to interact with whatever is beyond the physical has increased. So the number of believers that they might be able to do this has decreased. So it's that's just where we are. And the one thing that being part of this, as I said, you're like 3 months into this and you can just no longer deny what you're capable of doing, that a switch flips, and that switching of that flip is you no longer believe that there might be something beyond the physical. You now know that there's something beyond the physical, and you now know that you are part of it and that you have always been part of it. And you now know that you have the ability to work within it, work with it, to contribute to it, and to take from it, to learn from it. And that is a human transformation, because you can spend a lifetime believing something in a religion or wherever you choose to make it. But until you have an empirical evidence, and I mean an empirical evidence, anytime somebody tells me they know something and they cannot substantiate that empirically, I will tell you, you know nothing. You do not know. You just choose to believe very strongly. I don't care what you tell me. If you cannot offer me the empirical evidence as to why you're now telling me you know it, then you don't know it. So you won't know it until you do that, till you do the work in this particular genre you do the work in the physical and the non-physical, and you come to this point where you stop believing and you know that it is there because of empirical evidence and experience, not anecdotal, claims of something. And that's just the way it is. I mean, that's how I see it. That's how I teach all of my students to think about it. And they know that, anecdotal serves a purpose to some degree when you're sharing information, but empirical evidence is what we do to determine, am I on target, not on target, and how, looking at quantifiable, measurable attributes in your feedback and looking at the correlating data with that and establishing, a statistical relevance for your work in there and for the entire class's work and being able to see how all of us are better than one of us, right? Which is why, you don't ever trust the results of a single remote viewer operating independently of other remote viewers. All of us
It's
are
like
better
any
than one.
intelligence tool, right? It's like any
Yes.
intelligence tool. You can't rely 100% on satellite intelligence. You can't rely 100% on human intelligence. You have to take a mosaic, or you have to look at the mosaic of
All
various
source
sources.
intelligence. That's why it's there.
That's right.
32 different intelligence collection methodologies out there. Back then, it wasn't that many, but there is that many now. And not any one of them is considered 100% accurate. If they were considered 100% accurate, they wouldn't need 32 of them, know? So, remote viewing held its own as it was expected to hold its own in and amongst all of the other intelligence collection methodologies. Never 100% accurate, never will be. Because why? Because it's a human involvement. It has a human interpretation of the data. And then it has another human interpretation of what every remote viewer produced. An analyst is a human interpretation. There's nothing that produces 100% accurate. I mean, even if it's a satellite photo, it's interpreted by a human being, right? It doesn't matter what it might be. I mean, God, we went to war in Iraq because of human intelligence. So that shows you how accurate that is. It's just, so you can't overstep what it's capable of doing, and you can't lie about your accuracy, and you can't try to stand as an independent operator talking about how good you are, because I promise you, I'll show you how you aren't. Everybody has good days and bad days. Everybody has good days. We have cycles of performance, and as remote viewers, just like we have cycles of performance in every other aspect of our lives. It's absolutely no different. So when you start hearing somebody standing up and saying, I'm habitually 70% accurate, or I'm the highest, most accurate all the time, it's just bullshit. It's just ridiculousness, because it does not work that way. And it's in a class, even with new viewers learning, somebody will get real disheartened because in measuring their data against the quantifiable attributes they're given in their feedback, whether it's 100 or 200 or 250 attributes, saying these elements should be perceivable in this target. There'll be some people, as they're learning this and they're struggling with the protocol, come back and go, shit, I was like 8% accurate. I don't care. What I care about is you learning the protocol, because that person over there who had a 68% target today, watch, just watch, because literally,
and this is something anybody
tomorrow
can learn
morning,
to do, right?
Absolutely, you can. Absolutely, you can. As long as you can listen to what I'm telling you to listen to, and the things that I tell you to leave at the door, you have to leave at the door. You can't come through and
you can't bring crystals. You can't wear crystals.
You can't bring crystals, and you have to learn to look at this with kind of a pure eyes, and because everything changes with this, because it's a dogmatic process, right? It's not a freewheeling, write down whatever's coming. You have to move through the protocol as a dogma. You have to follow the rules of it, and you get there. Because why? Because I have to make sure that it's going to be empirical for your experience. Because my objective is to have that transformation switch flip. That's my objective for you. Because after that, what you choose to do next, if you want to go to extended remote viewing or advanced techniques or thought incubation and mastery or explorers, whatever you want to do, that's up to you. But My whole objective in this is to get you through coordinate remote viewing, to get you to a transition, to be in this place of
Just really
knowing,
quick,
not
David,
believing.
I want to give you a chance to just do a quick plug. If they want to learn remote viewing from you specifically, where can they look, and what are you working on that where they might be able to do that?
Well, there are two places right now. Primarily, I would say that most of the people here would probably want to go to davidmorehouse.org, not davidmorehouse.com. I am not in charge of that website, and I do not endorse it. So go to davidmorehouse.org, and there are no classes on the schedule there, but you can read the course descriptions and see the prices. For others, if you're so inclined, go to upgrade, upgrd.com. And there you'll see my friend and partner, William Lamb. And I will warn you, those, just their course packages are expensive. It's a different audience.
Their
Okay.
customer base is corporate. It sounds like that's
Yeah,
the target.
they are corporate, and they're corporate business owners. So like I said to you earlier, there are some that are just starting out that are here, but there are multi-billionaires in this audience that are there. So, I mean, it's crazy.
Okay. I mean, there are other places folks can, if you
if you want to learn from me, those are the two
original
places
unit.
you go.
Yeah. Okay. Now, you're doing this remote viewing. What are some of the targets that you started out with while you were in the unit?
You mean operational targets?
Yeah.
Well, it's a rogues gallery. It's the same thing at any, that would pop up in Intel. I mean, it's anything. We're in a Cold War. I mean, some of the ones, were Flight 803 over Lockerbie, Cal 007, different kinds of meetings that were taking place in the Kremlin, drug shipments. Where were they on freighters? What were the freighters going to do in the open sea? Anything. You just imagination. There
Anything
were
with
military
tangible
intelligence
military target value, high value targets, that sort of stuff. The military
anything that comes through from all source intelligence requests, comes from whatever agency it comes through. It comes through the DIA, and the DIA tasks it out to all of their assets, and we were one of those assets. So we would work that target, and over whatever the amount of time was given for it to be worked, and Fern Gavin would do an aggregate and pull it all together and do the analysis and do a summary correlating all the data in the viewer's summaries and sessions, and aggregate sketches occasionally, and then send those forward to DIA, to the analysts, who would then, I'm assuming, package it along with other individual or other sources that they requested or tasked, and pull that together and send it back to the customer, whoever that customer happened to be.
Were there any targets that you observed that were not necessarily operational targets? Because I'm not aware of you having done any. You may have, but done any operational targets that are more esoteric in nature, or off-world targets of things that you can't necessarily verify with other sources of intelligence for practice. I know your friend Ed Dames may have assigned you some of these things.
Well, it wasn't just Ed. I mean, it was Fern was instrumental in doing it as well. And I know that there were some individuals in the unit that Fern just flat wouldn't have tasked. So, I mean, that's why you run into these things where you hear from me, you'll hear from me and from Ed, and you would have heard from Mel Riley. You heard from Lynn Buchanan when we were on together, that we all worked off planet targets. That was a standard tasking to us. Some of them were done as kind of calibration because they had empirical evidence that could be used as feedback, like Twin Peaks on Mars, or looking for a particular rover location and being able to describe it. And again, these are all blind. These are just the intent of the target. The viewer has no idea. Or looking into Olympus Mons, or any other thing that they had that they just wanted to make sure that they could know that, let you see that you had the ability to detect, decode, and objectify waveform expressions of data, whether it was on Mars or whether it was on the front side of the moon or the back side of the moon or, some other place. But they had to have empirical evidence of it. They had to be able to say, here are photos of what's there or what was left there, that kind of thing. And then, once you had crossed that particular bridge, then there were, there was an entire elaborate process used where a Cartesian coordinate system was applied to a representative, a model of the known universe, right? Or
So different
the
quadrants of
entire
stars
universe.
and stuff like that.
Right. I mean, it could be particular star in a particular galaxy could be used, but when you start doing that would have been a pinpoint target, right? If they have a star that's numbered and they know what that is, well, they probably can get from some astronomy department or whomever was taking photos of and numbering that star within the galaxy information about that star
And then they can
in
verify
basic
that you're
terms,
looking at the right
analysis
star,
of
right? Because
right
right.
gas makeup, mass makeup, mass of the star, etc. And then there were others that were called open search outwards, which were, again, this is a Cartesian system. We know that the universe began from a point of singularity, and the idea of a big bang, people think it exploded out, where that's a misnomer. It's not what happened. It's not at all what happened. What happened is it came from a point of singularity and began to expand outward, and and mass then began to form, and it continues to expand outward. This has been known for a very long time amongst physicists and astronomers or cosmologists. And there's been a great deal of work done trying to, go from what they know the expansion speed in the universe is to calculate back to the point of singularity and then to extrapolate outward to try to determine, how big is the universe now? Because we now know it's not eternal. We know that it began from a point and spread outward. And I'm not disappointed by saying or realizing it's not eternal, because what intrigues me now is if it has an edge, what's it in? What did it expand into? And and there are all sorts of other theories that now intrigue me and others who, like, if a black hole is what a black hole is, they speculate that it is, and it's pulling mass and energy in and disappearing through the event horizon. Might that be another point of singularity where another universe is now expanding outward there? So I know that a great deal of work was done by some of the greatest physicists alive, and many now gone, trying to get us back to that point of singularity, and they never got us. I mean, they were never able to calculate it back. There were things that they were trying desperately to keep putting time into the equation, and time, which is not a cosmic law, but so time was screwing it up. The time they get back to a certain point in time in the equation, fouled the equation, and it took them a long time to figure that out. Stephen Hawking was,
Stephen Hawking. Yeah.
He worked very hard at that and was very frustrated by it. And, his researchers on his team were constantly trying to get him to allow them to remove time from the equation. And he couldn't understand. He couldn't see it. He just couldn't see how it could be removed, because it is considered to be part of space, right?
Space-time, right.
But it is, yeah. So anyway, that's a whole nother big lecture and read. But so you can, if you know that the universe is supposed to have an edge on it, there's all sorts of mathematical models now that have, there's about 3 principal shapes that they believe it could possibly be. And it's really interesting. And you can find those in papers. You could also probably just Google it and find them. But you can take now a figurative model, and you can develop a Cartesian grid system. So let's just say you are taking a circular model of the universe and or rather a spheric model of the universe. You could take a Cartesian coordinate system, say, X 1 through 100, Y 1 through 100, Z 1 through 100. So now you're cutting that sphere up, right, into all those quadrants, which would, equal 8 quadrants by doing that. But you would then, if you selected one, one Cartesian, one coordinate, it would give you a spot within a quadrant or deep within the center, buried between all of the quadrants. And then
Yeah,
you
like a
could pull
cube within
that out,
space time,
a cube
and
within
any stars
space-time.
included in that cube would be where you would
Correct.
send them for open
Then
source
you could
download.
bring that back, and you can bring that back and then figuratively apply another Cartesian coordinate system to it and further divide that down. And then you could take another cube out of that cube and divide it again. And usually it was done 3 times just for its statistical relevance, to do it 3 times. And then to pull that out, and that then became the target cube, the target in that known or suspected universe. Now, why would they do that? Because then they can assign the coordinate to it, not the Cartesian now. Now it becomes 2 sets of 4 numbers representing the concept of the target in the mind of the individual assigning those coordinates. And why and what? What's the intention there? The intention is an open search outward. Why? Because it's a shotgun blast into that. So 10 viewers are shotgunned into this in a session. And it is suspected that if 10 go, 7 will stumble on something. Of those 7 that stumble onto something, that make that hit something other than just blackness during the 90 minutes, that they're now going to look for correlating data. And maybe in the correlating data, out of the 7 that hit something, 5 correlate extraordinarily well, to very high level value. So that then becomes a new target for exploration. And that will go in the historical folder. And next time around, when they want to do it, they will pull that out and they will send, a team of viewers again to see, because what do they want to do? They want to see if the data correlates again. That's what they're doing. And they're just gathered and pulled that kind of information in. But, you've heard Mel, Ed, myself, and you've heard Lynn talk about doing that, but then, Paul Smith will say that it was never done. Okay.
Well, he probably never
So,
did. I mean,
he never did it. That's exactly the
I think
point.
he may have looked at 1 or 2, I think, moon targets, but not. I don't think he was assigned to a lot of them.
Well, he wasn't there much in the 3 years I was there, because he was going to Defense Intelligence College to get a master's degree, plus taking care of his kids. So he was a busy man in those days. Yeah. What else?
So when you were doing some of these remote viewing targets, I think there is a story that you tell where you observed some set of entities, and when you're remote viewing, you're supposed to kind of keep a sense of detachment and not kind of interact, or at least attempt to interact with elements of the target. But sometimes people can get pulled in. Do you know which instance I'm talking about?
Well, I know what you're alluding to. Yeah. I mean, like it wasn't that you weren't supposed to try to interact. It was just the fact that what you're observing was not interested in interacting with you. I mean, you was not that you were like keeping distance. I mean, if you felt like something, you got something's attention. I mean, it's not you're like trying to dance, but I mean, remember what you're doing there. You're detecting and decoding and objectifying, and you really have no idea if what you're seeing is, if it's real or it's not, because you have no empirical evidence of it. But if you're seeing it and you're experiencing it, you're certainly making some effort especially if you feel like it's aware of your presence, you're trying to engage with it. But most of the time, in fact, I don't know of any time really, if memory serves, I don't know of any time where anybody came back and reported an interaction with another entity. I mean, these other life forms seem to be, operating in a completely different level and cognitive state, and we're aware of our presence being there, which that wouldn't surprise me. I mean, you're talking about some of these things that would have had clearly, been advanced and have interstellar travel capabilities and those kinds of things. And so we didn't, but if they, sensed us snooping around in there, then it was easy for them to recognize that and, you know, but never interact with us. I mean, like, not even so much as, you know, give us a wink or anything, but people were aware that they were aware that we were there, and we were, would come back and sketch them and sketch how they were controlling their craft and, sketch what they looked like and other things. Some sketched better obviously than others, but that was captured. Yes.
Now, how did the world learn about this program?
The world learned about the program when I wrote a book called Psychic Warrior. I hate that title, but hey, that is when they learned about it. And they learned about it not because I was pissed off at anything or not because of anything else. I knew I was going to be leaving the army. Knew I was going to be leaving the army because I was unhappy with I was doing not what I was supposed to be doing. It wasn't my purpose anymore, and it wasn't my calling anymore. And I started, shopping the idea of the book in 93 because I already made a determination that I was probably going to resign my commission. And I did so because I saw the Army differently. When I left the unit and I went to Torn Image, I saw things that disturbed me there. When I went to Command and General Staff College, that was fun because it was nothing but academics. I really enjoyed that. When I went to the 82nd Airborne Division, being a battalion XO, I really enjoyed. Battalion command, I really enjoyed. I went to the division training officer position, and I had to work at a level and see, exactly the kinds of things that were starting to turn me off, narcissism and, psychopathy of all measure and manifestation. And it wore me to the point I just knew that I was not on purpose anymore. And if you're not on purpose, you have to make the decision to get the hell out of there, right? Or something really serious is going to happen. You can't be a military officer and not feel like you're on purpose and, see the narcissism and the failure of command of somebody that, shouldn't be in that category. And for that reason, I left. I was going to leave. And then, of course, once the CIA, I'm almost done. Once we only have at the most 30 minutes left because the camera batteries are
15 minutes. 50 minutes.
15.
One,
Yeah,
so.
15.
Yeah.
So when that shifts in you, which it did, it shifted coming out of the unit. I just didn't know coming out of the unit exactly what had shifted. I told you that, when I came out of there, that I was different. It changed me. I was told it was going to change me. I was told, that my life would never be the same. The problem again, back at the unit is the unit, you have to remember, for a guy like me, I had no preconceived notion of clairvoyance again, back to what I originally said. So that meant that I didn't grow up recognizing this ability. I didn't grow up believing that I had some ability. So I didn't grow up in a comfort zone with it. And so when I suddenly, am realizing that that's there, I'm different than, Mel Riley and Gabrielle and the others who, have kind of felt like they had this ability at some point all their life. I think Mel realized it at the age of 13. I don't know when Lynn did or anybody else, but, they were comfortable with it. I was not comfortable with it. And so once I moved from believing to knowing that I have it, there's there, things begin to alter in how you see the world, how you see your role in it, how you see people, how you process people. It changed, and there was no mechanism, there was no guidebook there. They hadn't even thought about the fact that that might happen. I mean, they hadn't even
Mhm.
considered it, that it might happen like that, that somebody, who goes to this program who is not cut from the same bolt of cloth as these other folks might have a challenge now in trying to figure out how you carry this when you go back out into the world and try to function like you did before, because I simply couldn't do that. And not in necessarily in a bad way, but not necessarily in a good way either. I mean, there are certain ways in which you succeed in the military, particularly as a special operations army officer. It is, there are very high expectations and it's very competitive. And if you start standing back and looking at things
And
like
questioning orders and
from a
right, and questioning
transparency
everything.
perspective, yeah, you're you start to question people's authority. Not that you don't recognize the rank, but that you start to recognize the flaws in the individual. You're perceptive. You become hyper perceptive, hyper intuitive. You become hyper discerning. And there might have been a way to curtail that or control it, but there would have had to been some forethought put into that process of saying, okay, here's how it's going to feel to be changed in this way. And
Mhm.
let's help you with some tools and things. But it was outside the scope. And I don't blame them. It's just, that's just the way it was. But so now I'm navigating, seeing the world differently with a different set of eyes. I'm looking at the world, standing with one foot in physical world and another foot in a non-physical world. And that can, that's an awesome thing. And I'm greatly appreciative of that now with the maturity that I have and the wisdom that I have. And I don't regret anything that happened in life. I don't even regret what happened and how I left the military. I mean, it was all part of the process of learning and maturing and understanding that there was a right way to do it and a wrong way to do it, and somewhere in between. And I'm not sure exactly how, whether mine was entirely wrong or, whether I just know it probably could have been done better. But in writing the book, my objective was not, to expose something that people all the time step up and call me a whistleblower. And it's like, God damn it, I am not a whistleblower. Stop saying that. I'm not a
Yeah, you're just
whistleblower.
sharing
Whistle,
a natural
yeah,
human talent that everyone
exactly.
has
Because I
that they don't
believe
know
that it
about.
was something that people should know about. And I wanted to tell it from the perspective of, the CIA and DIA and the US military using it, because that gave it a degree of credibility that allowed us for me to, look, this was not born in a back room with a beaded curtain by some starry-eyed new age guru, right?
Mhm.
This was bought and paid for by the US government, and it was utilized for 30 plus years. And I have no doubt it's still being used as an intelligence collection methodology. It just went darker and deeper, right? Because it was a valuable tool. It still is. So I wanted to attach that to, and I was willing to take, um, I was willing to take and pay the consequences for that. I didn't think the
Yeah,
consequences
and
might
at the
have been
very
as severe as they
least,
were, but
the public, what's public is says that the DoD funneled $20 million into this thing, but even that's probably a very low estimate given all the
it's a
other costs.
preposterous estimate. Anybody knows anything
Right.
about government contracting, that yeah, it was, look,
It's a
if
lot more than that.
what
It's probably a
happened
lot
is
more than that.
when they knew in 93 that the book was going to come out and they couldn't stop it. I mean, they knew that the book was contracted for in 93. They tried from 93 to 94 to stop it, and they couldn't stop it. They just couldn't stop it. It was just going to be too hot of a topic. So when they knew they weren't going to be able to stop it, they started their disinformation campaign in 95, you know,
Yeah, the
throwing out all this
debunking of it
stuff,
wasn't.
releasing it in the
Yeah.
newspapers, debunking it, criticizing, my character and other things. And okay, I mean, like I said, I knew there would be consequences. I was unclear. Maybe it was just my naivete. I didn't think the consequences would end up being as severe as they ended up being, but so be it.
Mhm.
The decision was made by me. I'm a big boy, you know, was then, I am now. So I can, I chose to stand in a blast zone, so I have to take the blast. But I was reinstated, and I was given
Yeah,
an
you
honorable
definitely took
discharge.
you took a bullet. I mean, even there
Yeah,
was the
it was.
incident in I think in Maryland
Yeah,
with the
it doesn't.
yeah, we don't have to talk about that
Yeah, it
again,
was.
but
There were. Look, that was not the agency coming after my family. That was some jackass that was in the program or used to be in the program, who knew somebody who knew somebody else. I mean, let's face it, in this country, you can get somebody, roughed up or killed for a cup of coffee and a donut. So it's not really hard to find somebody to try to shake somebody up or scare them. And that's certainly what happened. But, it almost resulted in the death of my family. So it, it was just stupid. And it was, somebody, like I said, who used to be in the program or what still was in the program. So who did that or instigated it. It was not, nobody put my face up on a briefing board in the agency and said, so we got to get a team to go get this guy. That didn't happen. And that is why, the world knows that remote viewing, was an intelligence collection methodology. That's why they know it. And as luck would have it, for all the rest of them who are in the unit, every one of them has now written their own book. So good for
right,
them, you know.
right, right. And many of them
Oddly,
have
not
their
one
own.
has ever come to me and said, "Hey, thanks for doing that."
Yeah, well, I mean, again, there's a mixture of. Again, I can't speak for any of them, but any human natural reaction, there'll be a mix of envy, right? Because they were too, didn't
Yeah,
take the risk of doing it themselves. You took the risk and you took the bullet for all of them, but you also got the first mover advantage, which is kind of what. So everything
yeah.
kind of balances in its own,
Such as it was. If anybody thinks
cosmic
it was
way.
done for money, it wasn't, because you don't make money selling books like that, not unless you're Tom Clancy. And it certainly wasn't done for fame, because the kind of fame that it brought me was not the not the kind of fame that
Yeah, it wasn't. It
anybody
wasn't. It
wanted.
wasn't necessarily the
No,
great attention, right?
no, yeah, but
So,
yeah.
so what's next? What's next for you in terms of because not? I mean, you
um,
didn't just do this. You started a medical company that helped train
that's
soldiers.
what I've been doing since like
Yeah.
2004, 2005. Is I've been a government contractor. My company trains operational medicine. We were at one time the largest in the world, training roughly 23,000 soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, coasties, federal and state local law enforcement, and, German KSK, 22 SAS, CIA, GRS. We were training all of them. And, and then, of course, with the war being over, now we have had a long-standing contract with National Nuclear Security Administration, and also with U.S. State Department. So we train medical providers, and we train them in operational medicine, which is actions at the point of wounding on the battlefield. And basically, we're running an EMS. We're running an EMS organization. We run EMT classes and training, and we have the ability to certify. We're at an extraordinarily high rate, up in the 90 percentile,
Mm-hmm.
for graduates of the EMT course that we run. And I'm surrounded by really good, capable men. My director of training was formerly with SEAL Team 6 as a corpsman, and my medical director, top of his class in law school, and I have three other emergency physicians that work for me, and then a whole bunch of other staff that work for me. We run pharmacies and everything else for these government agencies, and it's a lot of fun, and that's my life, and that's my big focus. But I made a decision. I made a decision after the wars were ended that it was
Mm-hmm.
probably a time uh, to get back into the business of teaching again. I really kind of
Mm-hmm.
stopped teaching because people, you know, we were in war on two fronts, and people were not any interest of going to remote viewing classes or pretty much any other kind of class, spiritual or otherwise. So it all dropped off. I mean, like the crossings in Austin, Texas, practically closed up its doors, and it was designed and built to be one of these, it was designed and built to be a university of bringing in spiritual and, self-help and, those kinds of instructors to come in and talk. It was beautiful, spared no expense. It was amazing. But it's not that now. And Ken and Joyce Beck had to sell it. And, it's the same way, attendance dropped off all over the place. There used to be 3,600 of those kinds of places, in the 90s. And, by the time we got to 2010, it was really dwindling fast. And I think it kind of reached the zenith of die-off. Like by 2018, there were less than 300 of them left. Globally, 300 of them left. There's still some of the old standbys, but no new ones springing up anywhere. But one of my friends, we have Gary Voris here and, Ted Abrams and others, Linda and Mari and just a host of others. If anybody else's name I forgot to add on to that, we all we worked for 18 months on Clubhouse. Every Friday night, I would talk for 16 hours, 12 to 16 hours every night about not just remote viewing, but everything. And, it just became clear that we needed to redo this. And of course, start teaching again. And also last year I did The Unexplained with William Shatner, talking about the Chaco Canyon thing with remote viewing. And then I did 3 Beyond Skinwalker Ranch episodes, 1 in season 1 and 2 in season 2. And those will be airing at some point here. And then we've already been told we'll be working in season 3 again. And that's bringing remote viewing teams in to do exploratory work to help them in their research, So it's been good. It's been a good, solid resurgence. And we just have to keep maintaining the standard of teaching and maintaining the standards of excellence in our viewing students and in our viewing graduates, so that we don't ever do something that would, discredit the phenomenon. Because too many, a price was paid to bring it forward. And I'm kind of intolerant of anybody that tries to bastardize it in some way, and thereby shame it, shall I say. That makes sense.
Yeah, look, there's any field that you go in, particularly if it's a new field, there's going to be people who claim to be remote viewers, and they might be psychic in some ways, but they're not really doing the remote viewing protocol that is related to
No, shamanism is not a remote viewer. You don't get to call yourself a remote viewer unless you've been trained in remote viewing. It's not a catch-all phrase. It's not a big umbrella phrase that you stuff things under. It's a very defined protocol. And so, yeah,
folks,
thanks for pointing that out.
You're listening to United Public Radio. I'm here with Dr. David Morehouse. If you had to leave the audience with some final words, David, what would they be? No, but you got, we could keep going, a few more minutes, but it's,
I'm not a philosopher, and so it's hard for me to do that. I just think live your life on purpose. If you don't know what that is, then you need to seek some path that's going to help you define what your purpose is. And the next step is to determine what your calling is that's going to help you manifest that purpose, and understand, just the power of intention in your life, and govern your life by intention, and understand the silos of the observer or the evaluator, and understand that if you stand squarely in the evaluator silo of intention in your life, that you're going to live an inauthentic life. Don Miguel Ruiz told me that. And if you're going to stand squarely in the observer silo, and all that entains or entrains in living intentionally, you're going to live an authentic life. He also told me that. So we are all evaluators on occasion, and we're all observers on occasion. The concept is to, by choice, seek balance, or if you're going to stand heavy on one foot, make it the observer foot. Observe, understand that there's no absolute, understand that, there are other versions of everything for yourself. That's the observer silo. So uh, that's what you're looking for, not seeking absolutes and not making your version of something the only version that there is, and more. Okay. It'll take me 20 more minutes to tell you everything about that. But I think that's probably the best thing I could say to the audience.
Very wise words, my friend. As always, a pleasure. It's great to see you, and thank you for
It's great to see you, Sean.
coming onto this radio show.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
of course. Thank you, man.
All right, brother. I will talk to you soon.
Okay, brother. Yeah, you too. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Thank you.